to the new and improved Transcend Liberalism. As you can see, I got my new office set up, I got my coffee, and I got my Hot Pocket. Oh my god, what the? How the hell can you have a glacier surrounded by lava, Hot Pocket? What the fuck? Oh god. Anyway, sorry about that, guys. What's on the docket for today? Let's see.
Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of How to Argue with Conservatives. I'm your host, Taylor Scollin.
Oh, hello again, Taylor. What's your topic this time?
And today I'm talking about some of the major arguments for capitalism and the problems that I think each of these arguments face. Let's get into it.
I hope this time you do a better job than you did arguing that the Nordic model is socialism. Okay, present your case.
How to Argue with Conservatives is a web series in which I, your host, Taylor Scollin, explain why the left is correct and conservatives are wrong on a given issue or topic.
You know, Taylor, this part of your video is really unnecessary because you've already covered what your show is about in your intro. This is just repetition and you trying to drive home to your audience that your arguments are the epitome of knowledge and know how to own a group of individuals. It just makes your videos agonizing to watch. Seriously.
Today we're talking about capitalism and some of the arguments that people make for capitalism. So we all know that capitalism is the dominant form of economic organization in our world.
I wonder why that is. Could it be because of its success in transforming a once impoverished society like Uruguay into a more wealthier society as a whole, like I pointed out to you in my last video?
But strangely, we rarely hear arguments made for it. In fact, when you press people on arguments in favor of capitalism, you'll have trouble getting a real response. Usually you'll hear things like, well, that's just the way things are, or that's just human nature.
Who the hell have you been arguing? The most popular arguments I hear in favor of capitalism are that it's a wealth-generating economic system, or that it gives a person individual freedom in their choice of labor and what they consume. The other great argument for capitalism is that it guards against tyranny and that a socialist dictator, for example, can't just confiscate your money because all you have to do is just move it out of the authoritarian's reach.
Well, okay, but that's not really a justification for something. To justify something, you need to explain why things should be that way or why we ought to continue doing things that way.
I just did. 3 solid reasons why capitalism is good. Now can we please hear your 3 reasons why capitalism is bad?
So today I want to cover 3 of the main justifications for capitalism that you might hear and some of the problems that each of them face. Now the 3 arguments you'll usually hear are based on desert, freedom, and utility. I'm going to cover each of them in turn. So let's start with the argument from desert. It usually runs something like this. People should get what they deserve, and capitalism allocates resources to people based on what they've earned in the market. Therefore, capitalism is good because it gives people what they deserve.
Hand quotes aren't going to win you any arguments, Taylor, especially when you downplay how people spend the fruits of their labor on things that they would like. So why exactly is that a bad thing?
Now, there are a bunch of problems with this argument. First, it's obviously untrue that capitalism allocates resources to people on the basis of what they've earned under any normal understanding of the word earned.
I think you mean your understanding. Earned is a very broad term that basically means a reward for your contribution, be it your labor or your money.
This is because around 30% of all income paid out in capitalist economies is paid out via capital income to people who own things, rather than people who work for it.
So, you don't believe you should get a return on an investment you made? So then I take it you don't have a savings account of any kind, because that's the same principle. You give a business or bank your money, and then they invest it in other projects, and if those projects make a financial gain, you are entitled to a portion of the earnings. The more money you invest, the greater your return. That's how it works.
So for example, I could put $1 million into an exchange-traded fund, which just tracks the stock market, involves no work or analysis on my part, and reliably collect around $50,000 a year in capital income off of my principal. Now it's pretty hard to argue that I've done anything to earn that $50,000, particularly in cases where I didn't do anything to earn the initial $1 million, like if I inherited it, for example. And it's important to understand that this is not some hypothetical scenario. This is what actually happens in capitalist societies right now.
Why does everything have to be earned to you? Are you saying that you've never once received a gift in your life, Taylor? I mean, also, when investing $1 million as you claim, you are taking an enormous risk that you might lose that wealth. That $50,000 a year return that you cited is not a guaranteed return on your investment. You could end up not making a dime. Then what do? This point just makes you sound jealous because somebody got something you didn't, rather than a valid argument against capitalism.
This year in the United States, the average person in the wealthiest 1% will collect millions of dollars in unearned capital income. So how is it that someone purely on the basis of luck deserves to collect all this capital income while someone who works more deserves less? Now, that's a puzzle for the defenders of capitalism, so usually at this point, they'll turn to a second justification.
It isn't a puzzle. It's a risk ratio. The salary you receive from your labor is basically guaranteed to you, even if that company is operating in the red. So because there's no risk in exchanging your labor and time for money, the amount your labor is worth is less than if you took some money and invested it in that business. If that business slips into the red, you've now lost that money you made on your investment. Invested money is not a guarantee to be returned to you. It's kind of like gambling. The risks of losing money is there, but there's also a chance that you could make 10 times what you initially bet.
Which is an argument from freedom. Now, this is the argument that capitalism is good because it only involves voluntary transactions. So I'm free to go into the marketplace and buy or sell things and enter into contracts without anyone forcing me to do anything.
How is that a bad thing?
So I can go and sell my labor and take a job for whatever price I can get, and then I can use the income from that to go and buy things that I want at whatever price I can get for those things. And all of these transactions are done by people acting freely, and so capitalism is a system that best respects people's freedom.
You are correct. Again, how is that a bad thing?
But when you look at things a little more closely, you see that we don't actually act freely under capitalism, even when our actions are not physically harming other people. But when you look a little bit more closely, you see that we don't actually have the freedom to do what we want under capitalism, even if what we want to do wouldn't physically harm anyone else.
I just got the weirdest feeling of déjà vu here.
For example, I can't go into a store and take what I want and leave without paying for it. I can't go onto someone else's property without their permission. Those sorts of freedoms would be a big problem for capitalism.
So I take it then, Taylor, you're just fine with people stealing from you and trespassing on your property?
And because those things are problems, we've set up an entire state of people with guns who enforce rules around property and contracts and so on to ensure that we aren't able to do those things.
Oh my god. Are you seriously making a case that because we can't steal from other people, capitalism is an evil economic system? Are you mental? Why should people have basic rights and protections in a civilized society anyway?
Now, it's these rules and institutions that I'm coerced into following that force me into the marketplace to sell my labor in exchange for money.
Oh no! You can't violate somebody else's rights! So you have to do things honestly? Oh, woe is me!
And of course, unless we happen to be able to live off of our capital income, we are forced to work in exchange for money. The only other option would be starvation.
It's funny that you bring that up as the only other option. Just like the socialist that you are, give me things or I'll starve. How about a third option where you become self-reliant, living off the land? There are several people who are doing this now and are very successful at it. So you just created a false dichotomy here.
Now, the point I'm making here is not that we should be able to walk into a store and take what we want without paying for it. That's not the sort of society that I'm arguing for.
If that's not the society you want, then why even make the argument for it in the first place? The backpedaling you exhibited here means even you concede that your point is flawed. So I guess this is like 2 reasons why capitalism is bad?
The point is just that capitalism does depend on violent coercion in order to function properly.
Because we can't steal? Do you even listen to yourself when you make your videos?
Now, this sort of coercion is often criticized by defenders of capitalism.
Citation, please.
When it exists in non-capitalist societies, but it's ignored when it's found inside capitalist societies. Now, it's true that most of us are just accustomed to these infringements of our freedom that exist inside capitalism, but just because we're accustomed to it doesn't mean that the infringement doesn't exist.
Again, can you please cite where you have the freedom to walk in the store and rob the owner? And how is that being oppressed by the lawmakers and law enforcers?
Coercion is coercion, and capitalism doesn't free you from that. Now, at this point, defenders of capitalism will usually turn to a third justification, which is an argument from utility. Basically, that capitalism makes life best for the worst off in society.
It does. Again, see Uruguay.
Under any other system, they would have worse outcomes. Now, you'll often hear this argument made in conjunction with anecdotes about how badly poor people in non-capitalist economies are faring. This is all the stuff about people in Venezuela eating rats and so on.
Well, for example, you know Venezuela, right? A majority of the country is currently eating rats while their politicians are drinking champagne on a daily basis.
Wait, what?
I like how you use InfoWars as your source. Like they're some sort of credible news outlet. It just seems to me like you looked for the most bias-confirming video that you could find and said, aha! This is what I'll use as my citation. Like, seriously, why even use the video? She doesn't even deny what's going on in Venezuela. All the while, you're laughing over the suffering of a whole population like it's some kind of joke. Like, are you some kind of sociopath?
But to find the truth, we can't really rely on these anecdotes. Instead, we should compare things more broadly. And we can do that by looking at countries with more pure capitalist institutions and countries with less pure capitalist institutions, and seeing how the worst off fare under each of them.
Oh, oh, this is gonna be fun.
So, if we compare the more capitalist United States with the slightly less capitalist Canada, we see much better outcomes for poor people in Canada. You can pick almost any metric you want, but a few that stand out are the fact that Canada has lower poverty rates, less homelessness, lower infant mortality rates than the United States. These are all indicators that the worst off in Canada are doing better than the worst off in the United States.
The Canadian poverty rate is about 1 in 7 people, or 14% of your population. The poverty rate in the US is also about 1 in 7 people, or just slightly higher at 15%. So they're basically statistically even. How are the worst off in Canada doing better than the worst off in the US? I honestly think, Taylor, this fact may have come from your ass.
And if you were to take Canada and compare it to countries with even less pure capitalist institutions like Finland, you would see that the poor are doing better in Finland than they are doing in Canada.
As I pointed out to you in my previous reply, the people of Finland are drowning in debt because of their high tax-funded welfare system.
So it just seems to empirically be the case that the more social democratic institutions you have in a society, the bigger welfare state you have, the better off the poor are.
No, they're not. Because welfare gives the poor no incentive to better themselves. Why should I have to work and earn a living when everything I need is given to me? All paid for by other people's labor. I mean, if what you are saying is true, every major city in America that is run by the left would be a shining beacon of your point. Instead, you still see vast amounts of people living in impoverished neighborhoods.
And logically, this makes sense, purely from a perspective of distributive efficiency. An extra dollar is going to be much more valuable to someone who only has $100 than it's going to be to someone who already has $1 million.
That dollar has the same value no matter who's in possession of it. The value of money doesn't change depending on the wealth of the person who has it.
And so if we wanted to maximize the welfare of the worst off, we would want to create institutions that distribute income equally, rather than ones that distribute income unequally.
It's funny. A little while ago you said you didn't want to live in a society that allowed people to steal from other people. But now you're advocating for it again. Do you ever keep a consistent argument?
And capitalism implies a set of institutions that distribute income quite unequally. So any sort of moves in this direction would really cut against the grain of what defenders of capitalism want.
Yes, because a meritocracy is better. It's the reason why you hire the best athletes on your team, because you don't want 3 bad players and 3 good players on your team going up against 6 good players on the opponent's team. And that's not a strategy for success. That doesn't make people strive to better themselves and set goals. Complacency always leads to failure. Again, Taylor, we went over this in the last video.
So these are the 3 arguments.
No. 2 arguments. You contradicted yourself on your freedom point.
That you'll often hear made for capitalism. Arguments about what people deserve to get, arguments about freedom, and arguments about utility, maximizing outcomes for the worst off in society. I think all 3 of them are wrong, which is why you'll often see defenders of capitalism switch pretty seamlessly between each of them.
I'm going to assume the strawmen defenders of capitalism in your head again. Whatever.
Now, unfortunately, this usually turns into sort of a circular argument where you just go back and forth, but at least now you'll be equipped to deal with each of them in turn. Well, that'll do it for this installment of How to Argue with Conservatives.
Oh my god. This video was so much worse than your Nordic model one. Do you even do any research into the claims you make before you make a video, Taylor? You basically advocated for theft, laughed at the suffering of a whole nation, all the while just rambling on incoherent points that, in your mind, are somehow valid. Taylor, I challenge you to a live debate. You claim you can beat conservatives with your arguments? Well, put your money where your mouth is, buddy. You name the date, you name the time, I'll be there. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And please hit that like and subscribe button so you never miss content like this. And don't forget that little bell notification because, I don't know, reasons, because the subscribe button's not good enough. Anyway, guys, I hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye!